The wind swept across the dry plains, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the faint promise of rain. The girl stood at the edge of the clearing, her hands trembling as she watched the shadows of men moving among the tents. Her stepmother's eyes, cold and unyielding, bore into her like a punishment already decided. There had been no warning, no quiet argument that might have spared her. One moment she had been tending the horses, and the next she was being handed over as if she were nothing more than a possession to settle a grievance. The Apache chief waited just beyond the firelight, a figure as commanding as the mountains themselves, his face painted with the deep colors of his tribe, eyes sharp and calculating. She felt the weight of her stepmother's scorn like a stone in her chest. "Go," the woman said, her voice flat. "You will learn obedience and respect, and perhaps you will understand your place." The girl's heart pounded. This was not the kind of lesson that could be learned in words. She had heard tales whispered by other settlers, tales of the Apache who were both fierce and honorable, men whose presence alone could turn the air heavy with tension. Her stomach twisted with fear and something else she could not name, a strange curiosity about the man who would now claim her for reasons she could barely comprehend. The chief approached with the slow confidence of someone used to having the land itself obey him. He studied her, not with malice but with an intensity that left her breathless. His eyes held stories, battles fought and won, losses endured and mourned. He was not cruel in the way her stepmother could be. Cruelty required malice, and she sensed in him only purpose. Yet that purpose made her knees weak. She wanted to run, yet the thought of turning her back on him seemed impossible. She had been placed here, yes, but by doing so, her stepmother had underestimated the power of a man who understood respect as a currency sharper than any blade. The girl's mind raced. What was to become of her now? Would she be treated as a captive, or was there something more complex at play? The chief's gaze softened ever so slightly, a fleeting moment that made her pulse skip. And then, before her stepmother could realize it, the chief bent close and placed a gentle, deliberate kiss on her cheek. Not in mockery, not as a threat, but in a gesture that spoke of acknowledgment, of daring to see her as a human being rather than an object of punishment. Her stepmother's face paled, a mixture of fury and disbelief flickering across her features. She had expected humiliation, not dignity, and certainly not the quiet power the chief now wielded without words. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of drums from the nearby camp. It was a reminder that she was not merely a pawn but part of a larger world she had never understood, a world that could teach her strength in ways her home never had. The chief stepped back slightly, offering her a hand, his eyes never leaving hers. She hesitated, every fiber of her being told her to resist, to run back to the familiar cruelty of her stepmother's house. But a deeper instinct, a whisper from somewhere inside her, urged her forward. He was not like the men she had known, and perhaps this forced meeting held more than fear and punishment. Perhaps it held a chance, though fragile, to find courage in the face of impossible odds. Her stepmother's voice cut through the tension, sharp and accusing. "Do you think you can defy me even now?" she demanded. But the chief's presence filled the space between them. He did not raise his voice, nor did he need to. His calm authority was enough to silence her stepmother's fury, if only for a moment. The girl felt the tug of conflict within herself, a mixture of resentment, fear, and a strange, fluttering hope. She could not deny the pull she felt toward the man who now held more power than her stepmother ever would. As they moved toward the camp, the girl could not help but notice the way the chief's people watched. There was respect in their gaze, an unspoken code that she did not yet understand. Some nodded in recognition, others kept their distance, all observing the small drama that had begun with a simple act of defiance. She realized then that this was not just about her stepmother's punishment. It was about the world she had stepped into, a world where honor and strength were measured in ways she could only begin to comprehend. The firelight flickered across the chief's face as he spoke, his voice low and steady. "You are not a burden," he said, each word deliberate. "You are here because the choice has been made for you, but how you carry it will be yours alone." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her shiver. She had never been offered choice in her life, only commands and expectations. The idea that she might have even the smallest agency, even in this strange new setting, made her feel both frightened and alive. She glanced back at her stepmother, who stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. There was a fire in the woman's eyes that threatened to consume everything, but even that could not erase the moment she had just witnessed, the chief's refusal to let cruelty define the girl's fate. It was a quiet rebellion, one that left the girl both terrified and emboldened. She could not yet understand the full extent of the power dynamics at play, but she knew instinctively that this moment would shape the rest of her life. The girl followed the chief into the camp, her heart hammering in her chest. She had been thrust into a world she had only glimpsed from a distance, a world of survival, respect, and unspoken rules. She noticed the tents, the men and women moving with purpose, the way the horses were tended, the careful attention to every detail of life in the plains. It was a stark contrast to the stifling walls of her home, where every day was marked by demands and scorn. Here, every action mattered, every gesture carried meaning. She realized that she would have to learn quickly, or she would be lost. As night fell and the camp settled into quiet routines, she sat near the fire, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and fears. The chief had left her with a blanket and a small, careful smile. It was not warmth in the way she had known at home, but it was a promise of safety, of protection that came not from ownership but from respect. She wrapped herself tightly, feeling the weight of the day pressing down, yet also feeling a strange sense of anticipation. This was the beginning of something she could not yet name, a story that had been written before her arrival but would unfold with her own choices. Her stepmother's shadow lingered at the edge of her mind, a reminder that the past was never fully gone. Yet the chief's presence was stronger, steadier, a force that demanded acknowledgement and offered a kind of refuge she had never imagined. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps even tests she could not yet see. But for the first time, she felt that she might have the strength to meet them, guided by someone who understood power not as domination, but as protection and dignity. The night deepened, the stars sharp against the dark canvas of the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a sound that made her shiver and smile at the same time. She could not see what lay ahead, could not know what trials awaited her, but she could feel the pulse of life around her, the rhythm of a world that demanded courage, respect, and the willingness to step forward even when every instinct screamed to retreat. The chief's eyes haunted her, not in fear, but in recognition. He had seen something in her, something that even she did not fully understand, and had left her unsettled and alive. As she drifted into a restless sleep, the girl sensed that her stepmother's intentions were not the final word. The Apache chief had turned punishment into a moment of defiance, a quiet rebellion that would ripple far beyond the clearing where it had begun. And somewhere deep inside her, she felt the stirrings of courage, the spark of something that could grow into strength she had never imagined. Tomorrow would come, and with it, challenges she would have to meet, lessons she would have to learn, and choices that would shape her destiny. But tonight, she had witnessed a power greater than fear, a gesture that promised that even in a world ruled by harshness, there was room for dignity, respect, and perhaps even something like hope. And as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, the girl realized that her life would never be the same. Her stepmother's wrath still loomed, but it was now a distant echo against the presence of the man who had dared to see her as more than a punishment, as more than a possession. The camp around her stirred, the sounds of life and survival blending into a rhythm she would have to learn. She did not yet know what tomorrow held, but she understood one truth clearly. she was no longer just a girl at the mercy of another's cruelty. She was part of a story that demanded courage, demanded strength, and demanded that she find her own place in a world far larger than she had ever imagined. The sun rose higher, painting the plains with gold and shadow, and the girl stood, brushing off the blanket, ready to face whatever the Apache chief, her stepmother, and the uncertain future had in store. Yet in her chest a single question burned, unanswered and insistent. Would the courage to stand with dignity be enough to change the fate her stepmother had tried to seal forever? The girl moved through the camp with cautious steps, the warmth of the morning sun on her face doing little to ease the tension in her chest. She had watched the people around her, noting the careful way they carried themselves, the respect in their gestures, and the unspoken rules that governed every movement. There was a rhythm here, a kind of order that her stepmother's house had never had. It was not soft or forgiving. It demanded attention and discipline. Yet, beneath the strictness, there was a strange sense of community, a way of life that seemed to honor strength and integrity in equal measure. She caught sight of the chief again, moving among his people with the same quiet authority she had noticed the day before. He spoke little, yet when he did, his words commanded attention. There was no cruelty in his tone, no false softness to ease the edges of life. It was honesty, sometimes sharp and unforgiving, but it carried weight. She realized she would have to learn quickly, not only to understand the people around her, but also to understand the man who had placed his faith in her without her asking. Her thoughts returned to her stepmother, whose face haunted her memory. The woman had believed that giving her away to the chief would destroy her, strip her of pride, and leave her broken. But the opposite had happened. The chief's gesture had changed everything, not only in the girl's eyes but in the eyes of those who had witnessed it. There was power in dignity, a lesson she would have to learn to wield for herself. Yet fear remained. Her stepmother was cunning, and she would not surrender so easily. The chief finally approached her, the dust of the camp path rising with each measured step. "Come," he said simply, and she followed. They moved past the horses, past the tents where women were tending fires and children were playing under careful watch. Every face she passed seemed to hold a story, and she felt the weight of curiosity pressing at her chest. Who were these people? What had shaped them into warriors and survivors? And what role would she play in their world? He led her to a small tent at the edge of the camp, its canvas worn but strong. Inside, there were no unnecessary luxuries, only the items required for living and survival. A bedroll lay neatly against one side, and a few personal effects were arranged with care. She wondered what his life had been like, what moments had brought him here, to this role and to this moment with her. The chief had not explained why her stepmother had chosen this course, nor had he offered excuses. He simply acted with a confidence that left her both unsettled and strangely reassured. "You will need to learn the ways of this camp," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is not gentle and it is not forgiving, but it is fair. Every choice has consequences and every action is noticed. You must remember that." She nodded, trying to absorb the weight of his words. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but she realized that now was not the time. The chief's gaze held her attention, and she felt a strange trust in his judgment, even though fear still gnawed at her heart. He handed her a small bundle of clothing, garments simple and practical, and a satchel that seemed heavy with unseen contents. "These will help you," he said. "Wear them, carry them, and understand that they are more than tools. They are lessons in responsibility." The simplicity of the items belied their importance. Each stitch, each fold seemed to carry meaning beyond the immediate, as though the chief's world was layered with lessons she had yet to uncover. Outside, the camp stirred to life. She saw hunters preparing for the day, scouts moving silently along the edge of the plains, and women carrying water from a nearby stream. Every action was purposeful, measured, and deliberate. She realized that she had been thrust into a system governed by skill, observation, and respect. It was nothing like the world of her stepmother, where power was measured in domination and fear. Here, strength was measured in awareness, in action, and in understanding the consequences of each decision. She spent the day watching and listening, trying to absorb every detail, every interaction. The chief moved through the camp, observing, instructing, and occasionally speaking words that seemed simple but carried weight she could not yet understand. She noticed the way the people responded to him, not blindly, but with understanding and respect. There was a quiet discipline here, a knowledge that life was hard but that survival required more than brute force. It required thought, planning, and the courage to act when action was needed most. By mid-afternoon, she found herself near a small group of younger women who had taken notice of her. They were wary at first, measuring her as one might measure a new arrival, uncertain if she would belong. But the chief's intervention had created a space where judgment was tempered by observation. Slowly, they began to speak to her, sharing small stories of life in the camp, teaching her how to move, how to observe, and how to prepare for what lay ahead. She realized that trust was earned here, not demanded, and that she would have to prove herself through action and diligence, not words alone. Her stepmother's face remained in her mind, sharp and unyielding, a reminder that her past was never far behind. She wondered what the woman would think if she could see her now, moving among a people who valued courage and respect over status and cruelty. She imagined the fury that would flare, the endless plotting to reclaim control, and the thought made her pulse quicken. Yet, as she watched the chief speak to a group of hunters, she understood that his world was stronger, more grounded, and far more dangerous than any she had ever known. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors she had never seen so vividly, the girl was called to the chief once more. He led her to a ridge overlooking the camp, where the plains stretched out in waves of golden shadow. The wind caught her hair and tugged at her clothing, a reminder that the land itself was part of the test, demanding attention and respect. The chief stood beside her, silent for a moment, as though measuring her response to the vastness before them. "Life here is not easy," he said finally, breaking the silence. "It tests you in ways you cannot yet imagine. The stepmother who sent you here may think she has power over you, but the truth is that power lies with those who understand the land, the people, and themselves. You will need to learn this or you will not survive." His words were simple, yet every syllable carried gravity. She felt the weight of them pressing against her, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the stirring of courage she had never known she possessed. She looked back at the camp below, the people moving like shadows across the plain, each carrying out their duties with precision. She realized that this was a world built on action, observation, and respect, a world where failure could be deadly, but where courage and intelligence could create safety. The chief's gaze met hers again, steady and unwavering, and she felt a connection she could not explain. It was not tenderness, not exactly, but it was understanding, a recognition that she was capable of more than she had believed. The evening shadows grew longer, and the sounds of the camp shifted as firelight flickered against the tents. She had been given no choice in coming here, yet she sensed that her future, even if uncertain, was being shaped not by her stepmother's cruelty, but by the lessons she would learn in this place. The chief had shown her that power was not in domination, but in command, in respect, and in the quiet strength to act with intention. The girl's mind wandered to the moments she had glimpsed of the chief's life, the careful attention to details, the authority he wielded, and the respect he commanded without anger or threat. She began to understand that he had lived many lives before this one, that he had seen cruelty and hardship, and that he understood the ways of the world better than anyone she had ever known. He had placed her in this moment not to humiliate or punish her, but to test her courage and her ability to rise above the circumstances forced upon her. Her thoughts turned again to her stepmother. imagining the woman's outrage if she could see the girl standing here, facing the vast plains with the chief at her side. There was a thrill in the idea, a sense of quiet victory that had nothing to do with revenge, but everything to do with self-respect. She realized that this was only the beginning, that each day would bring new challenges, tests, and lessons she could not yet imagine. The plains, the camp, the chief, and his people were a world apart from the one she had known, and she would have to learn quickly to survive, to belong, and perhaps even to thrive. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the chief finally spoke again. "Tomorrow will bring its own trials," he said, "and you must be ready for them. The choice to face them will not be yours, but the way you meet them will define you." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and challenge. The girl felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She did not yet know what the trials would be, but she knew that her life was now intertwined with this world, with these people, and with the man who had given her more than safety. He had given her the first glimpse of a life lived with dignity. She returned to her small tent, the night wrapping around her like a cloak. Sleep was slow to come, her mind restless with questions, fears, and possibilities. She thought of the plains, the fires, the people, and the chief's steady presence. She thought of her stepmother and the plan that had sent her here, and she felt a mixture of defiance and determination. She understood, more clearly than ever, that this was a turning point in her life. The days ahead would not be easy, and the lessons she would need to learn were only just beginning. And as the wind whispered across the tents, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, the girl realized that she was no longer a victim of her stepmother's cruelty. She was part of a new world, a world that demanded courage, understanding, and the willingness to face challenges she had never imagined. The Apache chief had opened the door, and now it was up to her to step through, to find her place, and to prove that she could meet the trials ahead with strength, dignity, and resolve. The first night in the camp passed with quiet tension, and when dawn broke, the plain stretched before her like an endless promise of both danger and discovery. She rose from her bedroll, her hands steady despite the uncertainty in her heart. She had survived the first day, but the trials had only begun. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the stepmother's influence still lingered, waiting, watching. And somewhere within the camp, the Apache chief moved with his people, preparing for the day ahead, unknowingly setting the stage for lessons and challenges that would test her courage, her resolve, and the strength she had yet to discover. The sun rose higher, and the girl took her first steps into the life that had been thrust upon her, aware that every choice, every action, and every glance would shape the days to come. Her stepmother had set the stage, but the story was far from over. The plains awaited, the people watched, and the Apache chief remained a silent guide in a world that would demand more from her than she had ever imagined. The future was uncertain, but the first spark of courage had been lit, and it burned brighter with each passing moment, leaving her ready, though not yet certain, for whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun climbed slowly, casting long shadows across the plain as the girl made her way toward the central fire where the chief held council with his people. The morning was filled with movement, the rhythm of the camp unfolding like a carefully practiced dance. Hunters checked their gear, scouts prepared to ride out beyond the ridge, and women readied meals while keeping a watchful eye on the children. Every action seemed purposeful, deliberate, measured with a precision she had not known in her life before. She felt her chest tighten, the weight of observation pressing on her, knowing that every misstep would be noted and remembered. The chief noticed her hesitation but did not speak immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the rising sun, then back to the camp, silently letting her understand that observation was the first step toward survival. He moved with the confidence of someone who had weathered years of conflict and challenge, each step deliberate, each glance purposeful. She realized that in this world, power was not claimed with force alone. It was maintained through vigilance, awareness, and a deep understanding of the land and the people who inhabited it. Her stepmother's face flashed across her mind, sharp and angry, a reminder that her past had not yet released its grip. The thought made her pulse quicken. She wondered if the woman would come herself, seeking to reclaim control, or if she had sent someone else, a messenger of cruelty meant to remind her that punishment was not yet complete. The girl shivered, though not from cold, realizing that the threat of the past was ever present, lingering like a shadow she could neither escape nor ignore. As she approached the fire, she noticed a group of hunters preparing to leave the camp. The chief nodded toward them, then spoke to her, his voice low and steady. "You will join the scouts today. Watch and learn. Do not speak unless you are asked, and keep your eyes open. The plains have eyes, and every movement matters." Her heart pounded. She had not expected to be thrust so quickly into a test of courage and awareness, but she understood that this was a chance to prove herself, to step into the role the chief had offered without hesitation. The scouts mounted their horses, each rider experienced, confident, and precise. She hesitated as she approached, unsure if she would be allowed to ride or if she would simply follow on foot. The chief's gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. "Ride," he said, "or fall behind and learn quickly why." She nodded, swallowing hard, and climbed onto a horse, the animal's warmth and strength steadying her nerves. She felt the weight of the day pressing on her, knowing that the decisions she made in the hours to come could define her standing in this camp and perhaps her place in this new life entirely. The scouts moved out, a line of precision cutting across the plains. The girl struggled to keep pace, but she did not falter. She forced herself to observe, to notice every detail, the way the wind shifted, the pattern of distant movement, the sound of birds taking flight as they passed. She realized that the chief's world required more than courage. It demanded awareness, attention, and the ability to act without hesitation when danger appeared. Hours passed, the sun high overhead, and the girl began to notice signs of life that she had overlooked at first. Tracks in the dust, broken twigs, and the faint smell of smoke carried from a distant ridge, all were signals meant to be read, interpreted, and understood. She felt a strange thrill, a mixture of fear and fascination, as she realized that the landscape itself was part of the lesson, part of the challenge. Each choice she made, each decision about where to look, what to notice, and how to react, would have consequences beyond her immediate understanding. Suddenly, one of the scouts raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. The girl's heart leapt. There was tension in the air, a silent warning of danger. She strained her eyes, searching the horizon for movement, for any sign of threat. The scout nodded to the left, then whispered something in the language of the tribe. The girl understood only a fragment, yet the urgency in the gesture and tone was unmistakable. Something was approaching. The group moved quietly, almost invisible against the golden plains. The girl felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had never known the intensity of being fully alert, the sharp focus that came from knowing that a misstep could be fatal. Every rustle, every shadow, every movement mattered. She felt herself becoming part of the rhythm, attuned to the subtle signs around her, yet the tension did not fade. It only deepened, as if the land itself held secrets that would not reveal themselves easily. Hours later, as the sun began its descent, the scouts returned to the camp. The girl dismounted, her legs trembling from the strain of the ride and the adrenaline of the day. The chief awaited her, his eyes assessing, calm and calculating. "You have learned much," he said, "but what you have seen today is only a fraction of the challenges you will face. Remember, the plains do not forgive ignorance, and the people here respect only those who understand the cost of action." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. There was no comfort here, only truth, and she realized that survival depended on embracing it fully. That night, as the camp settled under the starlit sky, she could not rest. The lessons of the day played through her mind, the movements of the scouts, the patterns in the landscape, the subtle cues that had warned of danger. She thought of her stepmother, and a quiet anger began to rise. The woman had sent her into this world to punish her, yet it was here, in the midst of the Apache camp, that she was discovering strength, courage, and the first hints of independence. She realized that punishment could be transformed into empowerment, and that thought left her both uneasy and determined. Meanwhile, the chief moved through the camp, attending to matters of leadership, strategy, and preparation. He was aware of her presence, yet he did not intervene directly. The lessons were not meant to be comfortable. They were meant to teach her resilience, awareness, and the ability to act under pressure. She watched him from a distance, noting the precision of his movements, the way his gaze missed nothing, and the quiet authority he wielded without harshness or cruelty. There was a power here that she had never known, a strength tempered by wisdom and experience. Over the next days, the girl became more attuned to the rhythms of the camp. She learned the ways of the scouts, the careful attention required for hunting, tracking, and observing the land. She began to understand the hierarchy within the camp, the unspoken rules that governed behavior, and the delicate balance of respect, skill, and courage that allowed the people to survive. The chief continued to observe her, offering guidance only when necessary, letting her make mistakes and learn from them. Each day was a test, each decision carrying weight, and the girl realized that the challenges her stepmother had intended were only beginning. The stepmother's influence lingered like a shadow, a reminder that the past was never fully gone. The girl imagined the woman plotting, scheming, sending messages through distant relatives or messengers to assert control. The thought made her pulse quicken, yet it also sparked a growing resolve. She was no longer the frightened girl her stepmother had expected to break. She was learning, growing, and discovering the limits of her own courage. The plains had become both a teacher and a trial, and she knew that every step forward carried risk and reward in equal measure. One afternoon, a scout returned with urgent news. A rival group had been spotted moving near the edge of the territory, their intentions unclear. The chief called a council, and the girl was brought to the fire, where the adults spoke in low, urgent tones. She listened, trying to absorb the meaning, understanding only fragments of the language but sensing the gravity of the situation. There was tension in the air, a reminder that life in this world was never safe, never predictable. The plains held dangers, both known and hidden, and the girl realized that her survival depended on learning quickly and observing carefully. The chief turned to her, his eyes steady and unwavering. "You will remain here," he said. "Observe, learn, and understand. The dangers of the land are not always visible, and knowledge is the first step toward survival." She nodded, feeling the weight of his command, knowing that every action she took, every observation she made, would be important. She watched as the scouts rode out, their movements precise, deliberate, and confident. The girl understood that the challenges ahead would test not only her courage, but also her ability to think, adapt, and respond under pressure. Night fell again, and the camp was alive with quiet activity. Fires burned, children slept under careful watch, and adults spoke in hushed tones about the events of the day. The girl sat near her tent, thinking of the chief, the plains, and her stepmother. She understood that the path ahead was uncertain, filled with trials, dangers, and choices that would define her place in this new world. The Apache chief had shown her a different kind of power, one rooted in respect, observation, and courage. She knew that she had much to learn and that the future held challenges she could not yet see or understand. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, she imagined the plains stretching endlessly before her, full of unseen threats and hidden lessons. She thought of her stepmother's cruelty, the chief's steady presence, and the people of the camp who had begun to acknowledge her tentative place among them. There was fear, yes, but there was also a growing sense of determination. She was no longer merely a pawn of her stepmother's punishment. She was becoming part of a world that demanded strength, awareness, and courage, and she would need all of them in the days to come. And as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, she felt the stirrings of readiness, a quiet pulse of anticipation mixed with fear. The planes awaited, the people watched, and the Apache chief remained a silent guide, preparing her for the tests, challenges, and lessons that would shape her future. Her stepmother's shadow lingered still, but in the rising sun, the girl felt something new, the faint but undeniable spark of power within herself, a spark that could grow into strength if she was brave enough to face the trials ahead. The wind shifted as the sun rose high over the plains, carrying the scent of smoke and dust. The girl mounted her horse, her hands steady now, her eyes sharp and alert. She had learned to watch, to notice the subtle shifts in the land, the way the grass bent under hidden trails, the faint tracks of animals and strangers alike, the distant glint of metal in the sunlight. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and each one tested her courage in ways she had never imagined. Her stepmother's cruelty seemed farther away now, almost trivial compared to the tests of survival she faced with every passing moment. The chief rode beside her, silent but vigilant. She had grown to read the small signs he gave, the tilt of his head, the shift of his gaze, the barely noticeable movement of his hands. Every gesture carried meaning, every glance a lesson. She had begun to understand that the chief's power was not in intimidation or threat, but in awareness and control, the kind that commanded respect without fear. Today, however, there was tension in the air that she could not ignore. Something had unsettled the camp overnight, and whispers of danger moved like shadows along the tents. A scout approached, riding fast and low, dust kicking up behind him. He spoke to the chief in low, urgent tones, and the girl felt her stomach tighten. The chief nodded once, sharply, then turned his gaze to the girl. "Prepare yourself," he said. "The plains are testing us today. What comes will not wait, and hesitation could be deadly." She nodded, gripping the reins tightly, feeling both fear and a strange thrill. She had faced uncertainty before, but the weight of impending danger was heavier now, pressing down on her with the promise of a confrontation that would leave no room for mistakes. The riders moved out as a single fluid unit, cutting across the plains with purpose. The girl tried to mirror their movements, to stay silent, to keep her eyes open for every detail. She noticed the subtle changes, the distant plume of smoke rising from a ridge, the faint crunch of broken earth that suggested movement just beyond the horizon. Her pulse raced, but she kept her breathing steady, knowing that panic would be far more dangerous than any foe. She had learned the value of observation, the power of awareness, and now she had to apply it in a moment where failure could cost more than embarrassment. It could cost her life. As they approached a narrow canyon, the chief slowed the group. His eyes swept the terrain, taking in every detail. He pointed subtly to the tracks in the dirt, then gestured for her to observe. Her heart thumped as she realized that the tracks were fresh, human, and deliberate. Someone was moving toward the camp, and their intent was unclear. The chief did not speak immediately. He studied the horizon, the canyon walls, and the girl's reaction. "What do you see?" he asked finally. She pointed to the tracks, describing the impressions, the way the dirt had shifted, the spacing of the steps. He nodded once, a small, approving gesture, then continued forward with renewed focus. The scouts moved cautiously, keeping the canyon walls in sight while advancing slowly. The girl strained to see, to notice, to anticipate what might come. A rustle above them caught her attention, and she tensed, gripping the reins as the wind carried the sound to her ears. A shadow moved across the ridge, fast and deliberate. The chief raised his hand, signaling the group to halt. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the faint whistle of the wind. The girl could feel her pulse in her throat, the intensity of the moment pressing against her mind. Suddenly, from the ridge above, figures appeared, moving with skill and stealth. The scouts drew closer, their own weapons ready, while the chief's eyes never left the approaching threat. The girl felt her chest tighten, a mixture of fear and focus that left no room for hesitation. She had never seen combat like this, yet the lessons she had learned, the careful observation, the awareness of movement, the patience in waiting, gave her a kind of clarity she had never known before. The approaching group slowed, uncertain of the strength and numbers below. The chief's presence alone seemed to hold them at bay, his authority radiating through every gesture. But the girl knew this was only temporary. The intruders would not retreat forever. Something had drawn them to the camp, and the plains had become a stage for a confrontation that could decide much more than survival. It could shape her place within this world entirely. She noticed a flicker of movement behind a rock, too precise to be random. She signaled the chief, who tilted his head ever so slightly, acknowledging her observation. It was a small victory, but it gave her courage, the sense that she was beginning to belong in this harsh, unyielding world. The chief did not praise her aloud, but the silent nod carried meaning enough. He trusted her eyes, and in that trust she found a measure of strength she had not felt before. The intruders began to advance, moving down the ridge with caution. The chief's people shifted into position, a line of readiness that spoke of years of experience and discipline. The girl stayed close, her eyes sharp, noting the rhythm of movement, the subtle signals in the wind, the way the sunlight glinted off weapons. Each second stretched into an eternity, filled with anticipation, fear, and the sharp thrill of knowing that action was imminent. Then, a sudden sound of branch snapping underfoot broke the tension. One of the intruders faltered, and the chief's eyes narrowed. He signaled, and the scouts moved with precision, their horses a blur of speed and intent. The girl felt the rush of adrenaline as they intercepted the approaching figures, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fascination. She realized that the coming moments would define more than the survival of the camp. They would define her own courage and ability to act under pressure. The clash was brief but intense. Dust rose into the air, mingling with the shouts of the scouts and the careful commands of the chief. The girl stayed back initially, observing, noting the patterns, the movements, the skill of each participant. She saw the intruders falter, their confidence shaken by the precision and discipline of the chief's people. And she felt a spark of hope that this moment, however dangerous, could be survived with awareness, courage, and careful action. A sudden rush from the side caught her attention. One of the intruders had broken from the group, aiming to flank the scouts and reach the camp. The girl's heart leapt. She remembered the lessons of observation, anticipation, and timing. Acting on instinct, she shouted a warning, her voice cutting across the chaos. The chief turned his head just in time to see the movement, signaling a scout to intercept. The intruder was blocked, the threat neutralized, and a surge of pride washed through her. She had acted, and in doing so, had earned a place in this world beyond words. The clash continued, each moment more intense than the last. Dust, sweat, and the scent of fear mingled in the air. The girl realized that this confrontation was not merely about survival. It was about proving that she belonged, that she could face danger and act with awareness and courage. Every second stretched, every decision mattered, and the tension was almost unbearable. She felt herself trembling, not from weakness but from the sheer force of anticipation, knowing that the outcome was uncertain, that one mistake could change everything. The chief's voice rang out, calm but commanding, cutting through the chaos. Hold the line. Watch the flanks. Do not falter. The girl felt a strange clarity in his words, a sense that she understood her role, her place in the moment. She stayed close, watching, noting, and preparing to act if necessary. The intruders were skilled, but the discipline of the camp, guided by the chief, held firm. Each movement was calculated, each action deliberate, and the girl felt herself becoming part of the rhythm of survival, part of the careful balance of strategy and courage. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, the intruders faltered. Their confidence waned as the chief's presence and the scout's skill became undeniable. Yet, even as the immediate danger subsided, the girl knew that this was only a temporary victory. The plains were filled with hidden threats, and the challenge of survival was far from over. She understood that courage alone was not enough. Awareness, timing, and the ability to act decisively were equally vital. The dust began to settle, but the tension remained. The girl's heart still pounded, her mind alive with the possibilities of what might come next. She glanced at the chief, who observed her silently, his gaze steady and assessing. She felt the unspoken acknowledgement of her growth, her courage, and her awareness. She had acted, she had observed, and she had survived, but the true test, she realized, was yet to come. As the camp prepared for nightfall, she noticed the subtle signs of unease among the people. Though the intruders had been driven back, there were whispers of a larger threat, one that would not be easily dismissed. The chief spoke quietly to his scouts, planning for contingencies, preparing for the challenges the coming days would bring. The girl listened, absorbing the strategy, the careful considerations, and the unspoken warnings. She understood that the tension of the day was only the beginning, that the plains would continue to test them, and that every action, every choice, could have consequences far beyond what she could yet imagine. Night fell, and the fires burned with a brighter intensity. The girl sat near her tent, exhausted but alert, replaying the events of the day in her mind. She felt a mixture of relief, fear, and anticipation, knowing that the climax of these challenges was still ahead. The stepmother's shadow lingered in her thoughts, a reminder that danger was not only external but also rooted in the past. Yet the chief's presence, his guidance, and the lessons of the plains gave her a strength she had never known. She was no longer merely a victim of circumstance. She was becoming a participant in a world that demanded courage, awareness, and resilience. Somewhere beyond the ridge, unseen eyes watched the camp. The girl sensed the lingering threat, the uncertainty that could strike at any moment. She knew that the true climax, the moment that would test every lesson she had learned, every skill she had acquired, was approaching. The plains were patient, silent, and unpredictable, and she realized that the coming hours would demand everything she had learned and more. The chief had prepared her as much as possible, but the outcome remained uncertain, and the tension was unbearable. The stars began to appear, one by one, glittering in the dark sky. The girl wrapped herself in her blanket, her mind racing with possibilities. She had faced fear, acted with courage, and learned the rhythms of this world. Yet she knew that the most intense moments were still ahead, that the tests of survival, courage, and understanding would reach their peak before any resolution could come. The plains, the people, and her own fears were converging toward a moment of climax that would define her place in this world, and her heart raced in anticipation, unsure of what the dawn would bring. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the quiet of the night, the crackle of the fires, and the distant whispers of movement. Somewhere beyond, the threat remained, waiting for the right moment to strike. The girl understood that she would have to be ready, that courage and awareness alone might not be enough. The climax of her trials was approaching, a moment that would test every lesson, every skill, and every ounce of bravery she had learned in the days since the chief had taken her under his protection. And as the night deepened, the girl felt the tension coil tighter within her, a mix of fear, anticipation, and determination. The plains, the camp, the stepmother's lingering influence, and the unknown threats beyond the ridge were all part of a world that demanded strength. She had survived challenges before, but this was different. The climax was near, and every heartbeat carried the promise of danger, the test of courage, and the possibility of a new beginning if she could survive the trials that waited with the coming dawn. The first light of dawn stretched across the plains, painting the horizon with gold and rose. The girl stirred in her bedroll, feeling the chill of morning but also a sense of calm she had never known before. The night had been long, filled with tension and anticipation, but she had survived, and the lessons of fear and courage had left their mark. Her stepmother's shadow still lingered faintly in her mind, but it no longer held power over her. She was awake, alert, and ready to face the day on her own terms. The camp moved with quiet purpose. Hunters and scouts set out for their morning rounds, while women prepared meals and children played nearby under careful watch. The girl rose and adjusted her clothing, noting the subtle gestures of the people around her, the unspoken respect in their eyes, the trust that had begun to grow despite her brief time among them. She felt a swell of pride. The challenges of the past days had transformed her, teaching her strength, awareness, and courage she had not known she possessed. The chief appeared as she emerged from her tent. His presence was calm, commanding, and steady, yet there was a warmth in his eyes that had grown over the days. He nodded at her silently, then gestured toward the rising sun. "You have learned much," he said, "and you have acted with courage. Today, you will see that courage does not end with a single challenge, but with the way it shapes the life that follows." His words held weight, a quiet acknowledgment that she had earned her place among the people, and she felt a sense of belonging that was stronger than any fear she had felt before. The events of the previous day had left their mark on the camp. The intruders who had sought to threaten the people had been driven back, and the plains seemed to breathe a quieter rhythm. The girl watched as the chief oversaw the organization of the camp, the distribution of responsibilities, and the careful attention to the land. She realized that leadership was not about fear, nor about brute strength. It was about awareness, fairness, and the ability to inspire courage in others. Her thoughts turned briefly to her stepmother. The woman had tried to break her, to use fear and punishment as weapons. Yet the girl had discovered that true strength came not from domination, but from facing challenges, understanding them, and acting with resolve. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her life was no longer dictated by someone else's cruelty. The stepmother's plan had backfired entirely, leaving the girl stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. Throughout the day, the girl moved among the camp, helping where she could, observing where she was needed, and learning the subtleties of this new life. The hunters shared stories of the plains. The scouts taught her the careful patterns of observation and strategy, and the women offered guidance and ways to contribute to the community. She felt a growing sense of confidence, a realization that survival was about more than avoiding danger. It was about understanding the world, connecting with people, and acting with intention. As the sun dipped low in the sky, the chief called the people together for a council. The girl took her place near him, listening intently as he spoke of the events that had passed and the lessons they held. "The plains are a teacher," he said. "They test us, challenge us, and demand courage. But they also reveal those who are ready to lead, to act, and to grow. You have all shown that strength is not just in the arm or the weapon, but in the heart and mind." The girl's chest swelled with pride, knowing that she had been part of these trials and had proven herself worthy in a way she had never expected. The chief's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and she met it without hesitation. There was trust there, respect, and an unspoken acknowledgment of the journey she had undertaken. The girl realized that she was no longer merely a visitor in this world. She was a participant, a member of a community that valued courage, awareness, and integrity. She had faced fear, acted decisively, and learned the lessons of the plains, and in doing so, she had discovered the power within herself. Evening came, and the fires burned brightly across the camp. Children laughed and played, their voices a soothing counterpoint to the intensity of the day. Women prepared meals, sharing stories and guidance, while the hunters returned with their catches, bringing sustenance and reassurance. The girl sat near her tent, reflecting on the days that had passed. She thought of the challenges, the moments of fear, and the instances where she had acted with courage and awareness. Each memory was a lesson, each success a building block for the future she was now beginning to shape. The chief approached, carrying a small bundle of dried herbs and grains. He offered them to her silently, a gesture of inclusion and trust. She accepted them, understanding that these were more than mere provisions. They were symbols of belonging, of acceptance, and of the acknowledgement that she had proven herself capable. The simplicity of the act carried profound meaning, reinforcing the idea that strength was built through action, trust, and shared purpose. Night fell completely, and the camp settled into a quiet rhythm. The girl lay on her bedroll, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the plains. She thought of her stepmother once more, not with fear or anger, but with a quiet sense of triumph. The woman's attempt to punish and control her had failed, leaving her stronger, braver, and more resilient. The lessons of courage, awareness, and action had carried her through the challenges, transforming her fear into confidence and her uncertainty into determination. As the stars appeared, glittering against the dark sky, the girl understood the true nature of the journey she had undertaken. It was not merely a story of punishment or fear, but a story of growth, strength, and the discovery of inner power. She had faced threats, observed and acted with skill, and learned the value of courage guided by awareness. Her place in the camp was now secure, and the people had accepted her as one of their own. The chief's voice echoed softly in her mind, his lessons carried through the days and nights. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he had said. "It is the ability to act despite it. Awareness is not the absence of danger, but the understanding of it. And strength is not in control over others, but in control over oneself." She reflected on these words, recognizing that they applied not only to the challenges she had faced, but to every choice she would make in the days to come. Morning arrived with a gentle light, the plains stretching endlessly before her. The girl rose, feeling a sense of peace and purpose that had been absent in her life before. She moved through the camp, greeting the people she had come to know and respect, aware of the quiet bonds of trust and shared experience that had formed. She realized that she was no longer a passive participant in her own story. She was an active force, capable of courage, awareness, and thoughtful action. The chief approached once more, standing beside her as he had in the earliest days of her arrival. His presence was steady, calm, and reassuring. He nodded, a small but meaningful gesture, acknowledging her growth and the strength she had shown. The girl felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for his guidance but for the opportunity to discover herself through the trials she had faced. The plains had tested her, fear had challenged her, and yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. She looked out over the horizon, imagining the days ahead filled with challenges, discoveries, and lessons yet to be learned. But unlike before, there was no fear in her heart, only anticipation, courage, and a quiet confidence. She knew that she had survived not only the tests of the plains, but also the manipulations of her stepmother, and she understood that the strength she had discovered within herself was the greatest reward of all. The camp moved with purpose around her, a living testament to the power of courage, awareness, and unity. The girl walked among the people she had come to know, smiling at their stories, their guidance, and the shared experience that had forged bonds stronger than fear. The plains, once a place of uncertainty and danger, now felt like a space of possibility, growth, and self-discovery. As the sun rose higher, casting warmth across the land, the girl felt the presence of the chief beside her, his steady gaze filled with unspoken trust and recognition. The past had tested her, her stepmother's cruelty had challenged her, and the plains had demanded courage and awareness, but now she stood ready, confident in her own strength, and secure in the knowledge that she belonged to a world that valued resilience, integrity, and bravery. The camp thrived around her, the fires burning bright, children laughing freely, hunters returning with their catches, and women moving with quiet purpose. The girl moved among them with a sense of calm and assurance, her presence no longer hesitant but confident. The journey that had begun with punishment and fear had led to growth, courage, and self-discovery. She had faced danger, acted with awareness, and learned the true meaning of strength. Her stepmother's memory lingered, but it no longer had power over her. The girl had taken control of her own story, embraced the lessons of the plains, and forged bonds with people who valued courage, respect, and resilience. She had discovered that true power was not in the cruelty of others, but in the ability to act with awareness, courage, and integrity. And as the sun set over the plains, casting golden light across the camp, the girl felt a quiet sense of triumph and peace. The challenges had been faced, the fears confronted, and the lessons learned. The chief's guidance, the support of the people, and her own courage had carried her through trials that had seemed insurmountable. She understood now that the future was hers to shape, that strength came from within, and that the bond she had formed would guide her through whatever lay ahead. The camp settled into the quiet of night, the fires burning low, the plains stretching endlessly under a sky full of stars. The girl lay on her bedroll, content and alert, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Fear had been replaced by courage, uncertainty by awareness, and doubt by confidence. She had survived, she had grown, and she had discovered her own strength. In that moment, she realized that life, like the plains, was full of challenges and tests, but it was also full of possibility, growth, and the quiet triumph of courage. The stepmother's attempt to punish her had failed, and in its place, the girl had discovered a new life, one shaped by strength, awareness, and the support of people who valued integrity and bravery. She closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace she had never known, ready to face the days ahead with courage, wisdom, and the confidence that she belonged in a world that recognized her strength. The plains, the chief, and the people around her had taught her that true power came not from fear or cruelty, but from understanding, courage, and action. And with that knowledge, the girl drifted into sleep, the night quiet and calm, the journey complete, and the promise of a future filled with hope and possibility stretching out before her.